Apparently I have everything set up properly. Hi, welcome back to the podcast. It's Observations for Sunday, the 3rd of March, 2024. I'm Dale Franks.
I'm Michael Wade.
And we're back. And of course, the second the podcast starts, I have a very large dog who is poking me in the leg with his head because he wants attention now. Sorry, buddy. No attention for an hour or so. Hi, Michael. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing okay.
Don't you have like a Jetsons like dog walker thing up in your background?
No, the only thing I have that's close to it, and by the way, I've seen people do this like on YouTube with their dogs, like they have a treadmill and they just put their dog on their treadmill, put the collar on and a leash, and the dog just walks on the treadmill, which would be great, except that I have a 14-plus-year-old Mastiff. So I'm not sure I want to subject him to that since he sleeps now about 22 hours a day. The other thing is that while I have exercise equipment, indeed I have it right here in my office, it's not a treadmill, it's an elliptical. So I don't think putting the dog on the elliptical would work very well.
That might be cruel and unusual punishment.
Yeah, maybe. Especially as bad as his joints and stuff are at 14 years old. I think I may have the oldest Cane Corso Mastiff in the world.
That's definitely pretty old for a Mastiff.
Yeah, I don't know anyone that's ever gotten that old before. So, I'm sure one has at some point in the 3,000 years that this breed has been domesticated. I'm sure that some of them have lived a long time, but 14 years for a Cane Corso is a long, long time. So, and he's still rolling along. So who knows how long he'll be with us. All right, let's talk about something. Last week was so depressing. In fact, the last 2 weeks have been so depressing. I thought I would try at least somehow to sort of lighten things up and to talk about less depressing.
This should be good. Okay.
Less depressing topics, as difficult as that is. However, today, the Supreme Court surprised everybody. And the Supreme Court announced a change to their schedule, saying they are going to release an opinion tomorrow, which is super short notice for the Supreme Court to do that. And here's the thing, we don't know what case it is, but everyone is saying it's the Colorado ballot case.
Yeah, they're not even done with their term. They usually don't release any decisions at all until, except emergency decisions, until June, nearly the end of June. So, yeah, it's got to be something pressing. It's either this or I can't remember if any of the Texas U.S. stuff has reached.
I don't know if that has reached. I know that, but last week, the social media cases, those were the only ones.
Yeah, that was a big deal, right?
They had last week, but I can't imagine they would have an opinion on that done in, 4 calendar days. I'm sure it takes a little bit longer to write those. The other thing they've accepted, but I don't think they've heard the Trump immunity one yet.
I don't think they've heard. No, matter of fact, I think arguments are scheduled for April 22nd.
Right. So it can't be that. So everybody is looking at this Colorado ballot case, largely, I think, because the actual Colorado primary is on Tuesday.
Yeah. So that may be why. Yeah, that would make sense.
But we've also had, in the interim, up in Michigan, a judge taking Trump off the ballot there last week.
No, it was Illinois.
Was it Illinois? I thought it was Michigan.
Yeah, it was Illinois. It was
okay. I could be wrong.
Some traffic court judge in Illinois, Cook County, as a matter of fact.
Cook judge in Cook County making a political decision. I find that so hard to believe. That is a weird one too, because when you know that the Colorado Supreme Court has already done this, you know that there is a case now before the Supreme Court,
and the main case is also. And that was just the Secretary of State, sua sponte, making a decision. But that's subsumed into the Colorado case.
Right.
So you've got two big decisions
Yeah. So why would you go ahead and do that now?
Virtue signaling. I
It,
mean,
that's the only thing I can. That's the only thing I can think of. I mean, it's just got to be a virtue signaling thing, because is there anybody in the legal profession that thinks the Supreme Court is going to let this fly?
think there might be a few who are that foolish. Um, there are plenty on the left side of the spectrum who will say that that's what's going to happen, is that Trump's going to get repudiated. Uh, I don't think they actually believe that. You know, like the Lawrence tribes and whoever. It's and especially from the oral arguments themselves, when uh, Ketanji Brown Jackson is being skeptical of your claims, and as well as Sotomayor and Kagan, you're not looking like you've got a real good shot. Matter of fact, the betting right now is whether or not it's going to be 9-0, 8-1, or 7-2. I mean, and I think the strong money is on 8-1 at worst.
Yeah, this seems like it's going to be awfully close to a unanimous decision. A unanimous, for the first time in a long time, a unanimous decision from the Supreme Court on this wouldn't surprise me.
On something as political as this, yes, that's not terribly normal. I mean, even Bush v. Gore was, I guess it was 7-2 on whether or not it was wrong, and 5-4 on what the remedy was. But I mean, and that was about as political case as you could possibly have at the Supreme Court.
Right.
I mean, other than this one, throwing somebody off the ballot. I mean, off a primary ballot. That's yeah. You've ventured too far, my young lads.
Well, see, and boy, this is so much more complicated than just that, because the primaries are party run thing. I mean, they're not state run. Well, I mean, the election itself is kind of state run, but the parties themselves choose who.
It's administered by the state, but control of the ballot access is by party.
Yeah, so I don't. And by the way, even if they did get elected, the Constitution bars them from serving in the office, doesn't necessarily bar them from election. So there's this. First of all, there's the logical leap between it's a primary and he might get elected, so we have to stop it. I think we don't know, first of all, whether he would be elected, and then the actual constitutional issue wouldn't even arise until it was time to seat him, right? So it seems to me the case would be whether, after having run and after having been elected, he's eligible to serve in that position. I mean,
and recall too that there is still one, uh, you know, militating event. In if he were elected, Congress, and let's say that Congress decides that he is ineligible under Article 3 of Amendment 14. Well, he could still be voted to remove, that malady by Congress. So it's really in Congress's court, if anything. It's not in the state's court.
Except it has already been in Congress's court. Whether you think it was rightly or wrongly decided,
that's true.
The Chief Justice in Henry Griffin said Congress has to act here. It is not self-executing. So Congress in 1870
impeached him.
Well, but
no, you go with what you're saying.
Congress in 1870 made the Enforcement Act and determined how the appropriate due process would work for that, how we would determine. And of course, since 1870, we've had a couple of different revisions, but what we've currently got is a crime of insurrection for which no one has ever been charged, including Donald Trump. And it seems to me that you would have to, I mean, to be considered an insurrectionist, It's not some state judge who can make that decision. That's Congress's decision. The process Congress has set out is okay, conviction for insurrection. That would be a disqualifying event. I mean, facially disqualifying. That hasn't happened to anyone. So Congress itself, and by the way, Trump has never been, at this point, Trump has not been convicted of anything. So
right.
It seems to me that Congress would literally have to disqualify him if he were elected to prevent him from serving, but they would not have to take any affirmative action to allow him to serve at this point. The affirmative action they would have to take would be to disqualify him.
Right.
So,
yeah, the default is he gets elected, and the electors report, and they certify the election. That's the default. The extraneous circumstances would be that there's some question about his ability to constitutionally serve. Well, that's completely and entirely in Congress's court, not in any single state's ability to make that decision.
Yeah, I find it difficult to believe that the Supreme Court would come up with any different decision than that. That this is just invalid on its face, that states don't get to do this, that this is a congressional prerogative, and how much they're going to depend on Henry Griffin, I think, will be interesting just as a matter of academic interest and legal interest.
Yeah, just the jurisprudence of it all. Yeah.
Because outside of Griffin, there's not nobody's ever decided anything.
Right.
This is one of those weird situations that after 200 and some years, it's very unusual that you find any sort of legal argument that has to that arises that nobody's ever heard before and nobody's ever addressed it, and nothing is really even on point. The only thing we have is Griffin. And by the way, since all the people who may have served on the Confederate side in the Civil War kind of passed out of eligibility simply by aging out of life, by 1900, we haven't even had to consider anything like this for a century and a quarter. Actually, more than that. Really, the last time we considered this was Henry Griffin, which was, again, 1868. So this is something we haven't thought about for nearly 150 years. And when we did think about it, it was because people who had actually been part of a real insurrection with like an army and generals and everything else, those people all died.
Well, and let's think about it. In that same time, we elected several KKK members to Congress. One was actually on the Supreme Court himself, Hugo Black, who infamously wrote the Korematsu decision.
Yes. Well, also, don't forget presidents in that.
Yeah. Well, we've had
Woodrow Wilson.
We've had plenty of KKK interaction with our highest legislative and offices of the United States. So if it didn't come up then, it'd be really strange to do it now, based on a non-insurrection that was not encouraged nor even suggested by the guy they're trying to lambaste with it.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. I mean, the entire basis of depends on everyone accepting as a matter of law that what happened on January 6, 2020 was in fact an insurrection. Which, by the way, the Democrats are all on board saying it was. Well, okay, then fine. Who's been convicted of the insurrection? I mean, it's an odd sort
Who's been charged?
Yeah, I mean, it's an odd sort of insurrection where everyone was largely unarmed, although they're now counting signs and flagpoles as weapons that were available to the crowd. Okay, There's always improvised weapons available on any public street. But I mean, it was a largely unarmed crowd. Apparently,
This
nobody
hand
was
is
armed.
registered with the county of Fairfax as a deadly weapon.
Yeah. So
See that kung fu grip?
yeah, that's. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Quentin Tarantino movie.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a scene in there where Bruce Lee is talking to the main character, the stuntman played by Brad Pitt, and Bruce Lee says, I'd fight you, but my hands are deadly weapons, and if I accidentally kill you, I get arrested. Anybody accidentally kills anybody in a fight, they get arrested. It's called manslaughter.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can't imagine the Supreme Court is not going to overturn all of these decisions, and then Trump is going to be back on the ballot. If you want to get rid of Trump, there's only one body in the country that can do it. Well, two. First of all, you got to get the DOJ to prosecute him for insurrection. Good luck with that. It's never going to happen. If they're not going to prosecute the people who actually marched into the Capitol building for it, they're certainly not going to be able to indict Donald Trump for it. And aside of that, then we're back to Congress. Congress isn't going to do it because there's not a big enough a majority to carry that off.
Right.
So we'll see what they say tomorrow. I mean, I expect it's the Colorado decision, and I expect it's going to be if not 9-0, it's going to be at minimum 7-2.
At worst.
Yeah. But by the way, speaking of the Supreme Court, this week they heard the oral arguments on the bump stock bans. And two of the justices, namely Justices Jackson and Sotomayor, clearly have no understanding of how firearms work.
Yes. Or how bump stock works.
And I guess the thing that bothers me about that is that for that particular case, and by the way, it's not the only one, because there are cases where sort of these questions of fact are important, and they're certainly important in the context of some federal regulations. And it doesn't seem to me that we have much of a remedy for a Supreme Court that is not by any means an expert in these factual matters to be making regulatory decisions about these matters. I mean, I'm not even sure why we're talking about these particular matters of fact, other than to get down to the ATF's BATF's motivation for implementing the regulations that they did. But it seems to me that kind of detour into the minutia of facts really gets us away from what the Supreme Court should be doing, which is actually looking at what is the statutory basis for the executive department to actually promulgate this regulation.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. I don't know that there is an actual, I'm not even really sure, honestly, where I'm sure it was pushed through, the Commerce Clause chasm. But other than that, strange justification, I don't know where Congress has the right to regulate this at all. I suppose under its ability to regulate the militia and armed forces, maybe you could tie it to that. Okay, that's an aside. I got to be honest. I really have no dog in this hunt. I find it such a strange hill to die on for the Second Amendment advocates, of which I'm one. But I don't know. I don't think it should be regulated, but at the same time, it's such an ineffective and rather mundane regulation that I don't see how this bleeds into anything else.
Yeah, well, it essentially turns a single a single fire semi-automatic rifle into.
Right, you can fire 800 rounds a second,
Yeah, well, there you go. 800 rounds a second.
and then you'd have to
Sure.
change guns and probably cool your hands.
Yeah, 800 rounds a second. So you want to give me some, idea of how long it takes you to get rid of an entire 30 round magazine at 800 rounds a second? Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous.
It's like a witch trial.
Yeah,
She turned me into a newt.
yeah, and look, bump stocks are popular because they're fun as a practical matter. And now I'm speaking as someone who carried fully automatic weapons on a regular basis, daily basis, in many times for a decade. Full auto fire has limited applicability in the real world. There are some situations where it does have some applicability, largely for covering fire to keep people's heads down while you maneuver, but you're not going to be accurate with fully automatic fire. Uh, so yeah, you're right. It's a
And
weird
it's
hill. It's a weird hill to die on. Other than, why is it being regulated by the ATF? What's their statutory authority to do it? How are they saying this?
right.
This now makes a rifle a machine gun?
And that part I understand. It's, I don't know. It's just, I don't know why the Trump administration. Well, I do know why. It was because of the Vegas thing, to
Yeah,
which we
sure.
strangely still have no idea what his motivation. We have no information about this guy whatsoever, which I don't buy for a freaking second. Um, but this is what doing something. So it looks like we're actually tackling the problem.
Okay.
Looks
Well,
like.
well, look. I will say that one thing. I mean, if you're just determined to have a mass casualty event, and you are in a situation where you can be surrounded by hundreds of people, where accuracy is not an issue, and let's face
Yeah.
it, bump stocks are even more inaccurate than regular fully automatic rifles. You know why? Because it depends on the rifle actually recoiling into the bump stock and then being pushed forward by a string to hit the trigger again. You actually have less control over the actual direction the muzzle is pointing than you would with a fully automatic rifle. But let's leave that aside. The fact is, if you have 20,000 people all picked up in a mass, and then you are just randomly spraying, and by the way, for a M16, it's closer to 800 rounds a minute, assuming that you had the ability to cycle through 800 rounds. But
You could change barrels.
in that case, you're not really concerned about aiming. You're not really concerned about. I mean, it does enable you to do a mass
Suppression
casualty
fire.
event.
I mean, that's exactly what suppression fire is.
Yeah, but I mean, in that particular situation, you have 10,000 people. They're all tightly
Just
packed.
spray and pray.
Yeah, you just spray and pray because you know that just the odds are going to mean that you're going to hit several people with
Hit
every
somebody.
magazine. Yeah, so yeah, it's just a weird one. The other weird one this week, the final Supreme Court thing I think we'll talk about today, is the social media cases. So both Florida and Texas have these social media laws that basically penalize large social media companies for viewpoint discrimination. And I have no real clue what the Supreme Court is going to do on that, based on some of the things that I've heard from the oral arguments. But it doesn't appear to me that the Supreme Court, anyone on the Supreme Court, seems particularly eager to penalize the social media companies. And they don't seem particularly eager to uphold these laws. I'm not saying they won't, but there seems to be a lot of skepticism on the part of the Supreme Court about the constitutionality of both laws.
Well, like we said last week, there's a lot of difficult lines to draw here, and the imposition on First Amendment rights is significant enough that you've got to tread very lightly here. I did see that DeSantis vetoed that particular law in Florida. Um, and it is different enough from the Texas law as as far as what it was purporting to do and what problem it was trying to um, ostensibly rectify. But yeah, I don't. The Supreme Court did not seem terribly interested in upholding these laws. I think they took it seriously that, hey, this has got some serious issues of competing rights. And while state power is something that we can't really tread upon, um, you know, or at least if we tread it, we have to tread it quite lightly. Uh, we also need to protect individuals' rights and their ability to speak their minds and state their business. So
But then there's the
it really
competing.
is a hard case.
Yeah, but and then there's the competing right on the side of the social media companies themselves, where their question is obviously, do I have to allow everything? I mean,
Right,
is there no speech that I can say this is not acceptable on our platform? Can I have
right.
no terms of service? And by the way, if I have terms of service, and uh, and I clearly say, say X and you're banned, you're agreeing to that term of service when you sign up. So why then would I have to allow you to say X? Now,
Right.
I think the one countervailing argument that comes up with that would be the trouble is that those terms of service aren't straightforward. And there's
But then
certainly,
again, that turns that into an individual versus the company case, not a state versus the company case.
yeah, exactly. Individuals may have a cause of action. Why would the state have a cause of action? Um,
Right.
on the other hand, if you have inconsistent and discriminatory enforcement of your terms of service, is any state action, is there any state action that says, hey, that's an abuse of your term of service that we won't allow? I I don't know. There's all this talk about Section 230 and treating them as common carriers, and you and I have talked about this for I guess nearly 10 years now. I honestly don't know what the answer is. Obviously, in the best of all possible worlds, there would be some level of invective that everyone would generally agree should be banned on the platform, and the platforms would evenly apply their standards, and they would be very clear and understandable standards. That's not the world we live in. We live in a much messier place. So messy, in fact, that I hear people say, "Well, hey, look, if they're going to impose these terms of service and they're just going to censor what people say, they should lose their 230 protection, and so people should be able to sue them for their uh, because that is the one thing that you can't do right now." Because
Right.
as you said, that becomes an individual cause of action. Well, no, not really, because of Section 230.
Right.
So then, do we, if what is the
But
dividing line between terms of service and acting as an editorial, overseer? I'm not entirely sure. And by the way, during the oral arguments, that was something the judges were grappling with.
yeah, well, because it's difficult. Again, like we said before, the lines having to be drawn here. I'm not even sure if you can intersect them, or connect them at the ends. It's a very, very difficult to, and part of this is because this is unlike any monopoly that we've ever experienced before. I'm a big believer in the laws that address, say, monopoly or um, you know, uh, whatever, property rights, etc. Oh, but it's a different type of property. Yeah, but the rights are still the same. I'm a big believer that you can actually transfer these over, that we don't need to change all these laws, that we can apply the old rules to this new form of property with really not any issue, unless you're trying to create special rights, which is usually what happens. This is entirely different. Typically, a monopoly had, uh, you know, was either resource dominant or access dominant. And this is sort of access dominant, except you're not forced to use it.
Here's where it gets complicated, I think. If we were to go back to 100 years, to the turn of the 20th century, and take a look at Standard Oil, right? That's the reason why there's antitrust law in the first place.
Right.
Okay, so Standard Oil was able to create what was more or less a monopoly. At one point, they had 96% of the American oil industry, largely because they were large enough that they were able to buy out their competitors and add their competitors in. And the idea behind antitrust law is that what happens once you are able to gain a monopoly is that you will have worse products and higher prices because you will automatically move into rent-seeking mode so that
Right.
you can utilize that monopoly.
And erecting barriers to entry and so on.
Exactly. Right. However, if you take a look at the sort of the decade between the time that we created the Sherman Antitrust Act and we actually managed to convict Standard Oil of antitrust violations, in that 10 years, their share of the American oil industry went from 96% to about 84%. So new entrants were still able to come into the market. They started slowly losing their monopoly. We won't even get into how stupid it was to take Standard Oil and then convert them into 7 regional monopolies, just like they did with AT&T.
With AT&T.
Yeah.
I mean, and just for our listeners, I don't know if that people know, but Standard Oil is Exxon. That's how. Now, this is how well it worked.
Yeah. So in the modern era, and I think we first saw this starting in the late 80s and early 1990s. In terms of tech, I think it's a lot different. You know, in the past, when we had a natural monopoly, it would be because somebody had a monopoly over, as you mentioned earlier, the supply of something, right? So up until, well, even currently, there is a natural monopoly on a couple of rare earth metals. There's like one company in Russia that supplies one thing, and then there's a company or so in China that supplies another rare earth metal. And that's the only places we know on Earth, well, up until the last year or so, that we knew they existed. Apparently here in the United States, we have a big motherload of rare earth minerals that we just discovered a couple of months ago. So that will probably change. But up until now, that's a natural monopoly. Look, you're wanting to buy unobtainium. There's one mine that produces unobtainium in one place in the world. You've got a natural monopoly.
Right.
Tech is different. So let's take Microsoft, where Microsoft Windows was and is largely the monopoly operating system for PCs. And it certainly was in the 1990s.
For business machines in general.
Yeah, because, look, there are certain things that you need to be able to do. You need to be able to share documents and files and all of this stuff with your customers. They need to be able to read your documents. You need to be able to read theirs. You largely need to be using the same software and the same operating system to make all of this easier. Everything just becomes transparent. And so even though there was IBM's OS2, there was BIOS, there was Amiga, there were a bunch of competing operating systems, they all died because people naturally kind of gravitated to Microsoft Windows. Now, we can look at some of Microsoft's practices in terms of their licensing agreements with PC manufacturers, requiring them to pay for a Microsoft license, even if they produced a PC that didn't contain Windows. And that was shot down in federal court. I mean, Microsoft was no innocent bystander in all of this.
No, they follow the Adam Smith rule that they're going to look out for themselves, right?
But look, once all of your customers start using Microsoft Word, you kind of can't stick with Word perfect. And
right, which was better.
Right. So, well, for lawyers, yes. Having extensive experience with WordPerfect. Um, let's not get too misty eyed and nostalgic about how good WordPerfect was. But that aside, everything kind of went into Microsoft. That became the standard because if you were on some Mac Power PC back in the early '90s, nobody was reading your documents. It was just a pain. And now we move that forward, and everybody has gravitated towards first MySpace, and then Facebook, and now Twitter, X, Google in search. I mean, that's just what everybody has gravitated towards. And so there is that element of people's preferences for that product kind of makes them a monopoly. Over and above,
first mover is known.
Yeah, first mover advantage.
Economics.
Yeah.
Right.
The trouble is that it's one thing to be a first mover to open up a mine and to mine silver, but ultimately other people can open up other mines elsewhere and begin producing silver if they have adequate capital to do that, because the barriers to entry are literally, can I afford to, can I buy a shovel and a gold pan that I can start mining?
Right.
So individuals could do it. But now, when you talk about these large tech services, the amount of infrastructure you would have to build would cost $1 billion or so up front just to have the available storage. But of course, you wouldn't want to buy it up front because you wouldn't have that many customers at first. You have to pull customers away from those existing platforms with what? What are you going to offer that is so unique and so different that they don't already offer it, or that they can't just add it to their service suite really
like
quickly? Like that. And plus the amount of infrastructure that you need behind that in terms of bandwidth and server farms and all of that.
Well, I mean, and that's
now becomes hard
you
to
have
do.
to reinvent the wheel. You have to reinvent the wheel that's already been invented twice by Apple and Microsoft. So I mean, and you have to do it in a way that's different than they did it. But I mean, I suppose in a way, Android approaches that. But I mean, that's a hell of a lot of R&D, and like you said, infrastructure, space. You're talking billions and billions of dollars before you even get off the ground.
Right. So getting from that back to the Supreme Court and the legal system in general, how does antitrust law written a century and a quarter ago, does it truly make sense with the way big tech works now and the reasons why those monopolies exist in the first place?
Well, first of all, let's discard the premise that it worked or made sense then.
let's disregard the premise that antitrust law actually works.
But assuming arguendo that it at least addressed the problem in a way people could understand, which I think is true. We just it's such a different economic situation because scarcity is not the issue. I mean, digital files can be replicated without end. It's intellectual property, so you've got some protections there, unlike, say, just going and drilling a hole and finding oil in it. Jed Clampett can do it, then anybody can do it. It's a very different world. And the other thing is that the importance of what's being offered versus with online social media, online access versus oil, power, energy. There's a big difference. And the other thing is, you don't pay for Facebook, you don't pay for Twitter, you don't pay for Instagram or any of that other stuff.
Yeah, right.
I mean, you pay, but you don't pay with money.
So that automatically brings up the question of the original idea behind antitrust was non-competitive practices, which you wanted to get rid of, and consumer protection. What am I being protected from Twitter?
I mean, well, the argument is that you're being protected from being treated differently than other similarly situated users on the basis of politics or race or whatever. Um,
Sure. And what harm comes to me when only 100 people rather than 10,000 people see my witty little post? That's what I'm trying to drill down
that's
into.
the crux of it, and that's the crux of it.
Who's being
You know,
hurt?
I mean, so you don't have as big a voice in this particular public square. It, I don't think the law is equipped to address this, and I'm not sure that it should be. Quite honestly, I don't like it. It makes my back bristle. But if you start tinkering with this, the unintended consequences could be absolutely drastic and deadly. Well, and so how this conversation started, right, was with the Supreme Court case that they just heard, and that Florida bill that DeSantis vetoed was specifically geared towards allowing private attorney generals essentially to go after tech companies they felt had treated them differently based on their political persuasion or whatever else. And some very smart people, I pointed out, and I'm hoping that influenced DeSantis, pointing out that, hey, this is a double-edged sword. All you're going to do is now give a method of attack to the lawfare happy left to go after every independent news source who doesn't fall completely 100% inside the left echo chamber, and they're going to go after everybody else, and they're going to make it so that nobody but the left has any ability to speak on the internet to Floridians.
Well, and beyond that, you would have to, I should think, if you were just running a little, Dungeons and Dragons blog, you would literally have to turn off any comments on that blog. Because that's the only way that.
Yeah, right.
Right. Any website or anything that you had, you would have to have no public interaction on. It would have to
or
be.
You just let it go and.
Yeah, but I mean, everything would have to be a one-way conversation because you would have
Right.
to be able to point to it and say, look, I'm the only person who posts there. Nobody else gets to say anything. It's all about me. And, good luck, making any
I have
money
noticed
out
a
of that.
lot of papers do that now. I don't know if you've noticed that, but remember when like all the major newspapers, um, and even some of the minor ones, everyone, magazines, if they had an online presence, they had a comment section for an article, any article. Almost never anymore. It's very few of them that have that anymore.
It still exists, but you have to be a subscriber to have access to it.
Yes.
So,
If they even have it to begin with.
if they even have it to begin with. It's a very tough issue. I suspect the Supreme Court is just going to say, no, we're not going to get involved with this. And we're certainly not going to just blow up Section 230 because, somebody was an asshole at Twitter 2 years
I
ago.
think there are several votes on the court that this is not the case to get rid of 230.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what case would be.
I don't know either, but I don't see that this is the one. And what this is my expectation is that they're going to make a very narrow decision that says essentially, yeah, we don't think that these laws are okay, but here's why. If you want to go back to the drawing board on this and, change some language and, do this or that, whatever, that's up to you. Or we're going to send it back down to the district court to deal with, those possibilities and whatever else. And because the Florida one is now moot, at least, well, it's not entirely moot, because Florida could still bring it up again, after this court case is done. I
Or they could
expect that they're going to
override
make a very
DeSantis's
narrow law.
veto.
Right. Well, it's kind of like in Bruin, where New York rescinded that law or suspended it or whatever they did. But the case or controversy was still there because there was nothing to say that they couldn't bring it back again.
Right.
So it's kind of the same situation with Florida.
All right. Well, we've spent 45 minutes just talking legal stuff. Um,
And this was supposed to be the feel good podcast.
yeah. Well, look, I
I feel
mean,
good. I mean, I
we
love this stuff.
we have not mentioned the destruction of Western civilization once yet. Oh, except for now. I just did. Um, let's. Well, maybe we'll get close to it with this. Kamala Harris, and obviously she didn't do this on her own, uh, in her own bailiwick as vice president. Um, calling, saying that Israel is causing a humanitarian catastrophe. That, and she did say Hamas needs to, give up the hostages and whatnot. But she's also saying that, and many in the government are saying that the Israelis aren't doing enough to get humanitarian aid into Gaza. The United States has apparently implemented an airlift or airdrops of humanitarian supplies, whatever those might be, into Gaza. And there's a lot of pressure. Bernie Sanders is now just saying that we need to force Israel to come up with a ceasefire. Granted, Israel does receive a not inconsequential amount of aid from the United States. But that aside, how is any of this any of our damn business?
Well, other than the money we send them, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure, but
we certainly don't have this sort of regard for directing Ukrainian policy with how much money we spend on them. So it is it, Israel is treated as a special case, and it shouldn't be, especially under these circumstances. It's absolutely ridiculous.
yeah,
And when have we ever funded both sides of a war? That makes just no sense to me.
well, I think there was a lot of temptation to do it in the Iran-Iraq war, but let's leave that aside.
Okay, that might have been exception.
As Henry Kissinger said, the greatest tragedy is that both sides cannot lose. But how is it our business to tell another country how to conduct their national security affairs? You know,
It depends on who you ask.
it's really weird. Last week we talked about the America First movement, and look, I recognized that in the 1930s, a large part of the America First movement was funded by the openly Nazi German American Bund. So, yeah, I get it. However, it seems that the United States government has gotten super comfortable over my lifetime just dictating what the security policies of other countries need to be. And it's just not any of our damn business.
Well, especially if they're also saying that we don't want to be the world's police. It there's you can't do both, you know, especially when we're funding everything. And I don't want to be the world's police, but I think we owe it to our country to keep sea lanes open in the very least, and at least quell any kind of activity, military activity that's inhibiting our ability to get goods from point A to point B.
Sure,
But
and in the post-war world, that has been our traditional idea. We will patrol the sea
and I don't
lanes
have a
and we'll
problem with
secure
that.
global trade. But
What I have a problem with is supporting one side or another, um, and then trying to dictate what they do. I mean, we didn't even do that with Nicaragua and the uh, against the Sandinistas. So I just it is wrong, you know, and while we are the benefactor that gives them the money, and I do believe we need to have an accounting for that money, it is clearly in U.S. interests to have Israel remain strong and be a bulwark against the growing Islamist problem in the Middle East. Just the question about it. Ukraine, I don't know how that affects us one way or the other.
Yeah, I was about to go there. Okay, but fine. If we're going to claim the right to be able to tell Israel how they should handle their defense and security affairs, why aren't we telling Volodymyr Zelensky how to handle his defense and security affairs?
Right.
I mean,
we don't even audit him.
Yeah, where is our demand that the Ukrainian government sit down with the Russians? I mean, if we're all for peace, why aren't we brokering some sort of peace in Ukraine? Will that peace mean that Ukraine will probably have to give up something? Yeah, probably. But I'm not entirely, not entirely sure what that is, other than like what is it, Bessarabia, Donetsk, those Crimea,
Donetsk
most likely
is the biggest part. Yeah,
Donetsk and Crimea, which
Crimea,
which by the way they don't hold anyway at this point.
Right.
But we don't do that for some reason. In fact, we can't even question our support for Zelensky's government.
This is why Tucker's independent now.
Yeah, well, Tucker has his own problems because, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Vladimir Putin isn't a murderous thug and isn't as corrupt, if not more so, than anyone in Ukraine. Let's not pretend there are, super good guys here on either side. But that aside,
yeah, I don't think there are.
Yeah, but that aside, and outside of the general principle that you shouldn't be invading sovereign countries, no matter
Russia,
no matter who owned
country.
them in 872.
Ukraine is a smaller country right next to it.
Yeah, the Kamala Harris thing, but anybody can criticize Israel. That's perfectly acceptable. But criticizing Ukraine, well, that's a problem.
Yeah.
And they're both filled with heathen foreigners. So yes. Why do we care?
Well, there are a lot more Americans probably in Israel than.
Well, yeah, that is true. But... That is true. I don't know too many Americans in Ukraine, but I could point to some in Israel at any given time. People who I personally know. But
yeah.
Again, and by the way, why are we taking Hamas's side here? How does
and that's the point that makes no sense whatsoever, except for these terrorist-loving, Jew-hating organizations and Congress critters, and that's all it is. That's really all it is. We've said this so many times. It's really kind of pointless at this point, but. The Palestinians are nothing more than an agitation, a festering wound to infect Israel with, that's supported by the other Arab states, so that Israel looks bad, and they hope to collapse it over time.
Yeah, the Arabs.
They don't care about the Palestinians. Yeah, as a matter of fact, they don't even want the Palestinians in their country.
No, the Arabs could fix this in an instant just by saying, "Okay, come to our country, you can be a citizen." But
Jordan's had that option for what now? 60 years?
Yeah, I mean they forced them into these refugee camps. Look at the border between Egypt and Gaza, for Christ's sake. They clearly don't want anybody coming out from Gaza. But I think the thing that irks me more than anything else, I mean, say what you want about Israel, but they are a legitimate nation.
Yeah.
It's hard to say that.
Palestine's not.
Yeah, it's hard to say that about Palestine. First of all, there is no single Palestine. There is Gaza, which is run by Hamas, and then there is the West Bank, which is run by the Palestinian Authority.
But isn't there like a bridge or something that goes from one to the other?
No, there's not. Those two...
You do recall that, though.
Yeah, making a bridge. But, I mean, they're not even the same... They're not even run by the same organizations. And, look... Whatever you want to say about Hamas, this pretending that they are
at least they have an ethos.
Yeah. At least it's an ethos. There was one election in the West Bank. One.
Mm-hmm.
25 years
In
ago.
2000 and
or 20 years ago.
oh, in the West Bank. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
There was one election 20 years ago. And like
Right.
most Arab countries, one man, one vote, one time.
One time.
And they elected Hamas. And Hamas has
Yep.
been, running it ever since then, but there have never been re-elections. I mean, they technically have some sort of constitution that requires regular elections in their, initial pretense for creating an actual state, but as soon as they got power, they threw that aside.
If I remember correctly, you're even required to vote.
They have received billions in aid. As somebody said on Twitter, they could have turned that place into Dubai. What they decided to do was build tunnels and store weapons and build missiles and launch them. And so
Starve their people, use them as pawns.
so after 20 years of terrorist attacks, and by the way, Israel left the Gaza Strip in 2005. They completely left. It has not been occupied. It has been run by Hamas solely since 2005. So when they attack Israel, what are you supposed to do? Are the Jews just supposed to suck it up and take it? Is that the way this
Apparently.
works? Apparently so. If Mexico was launching missiles into the United States routinely, despite the fact that they are an actual legitimate country
and an ally,
we would have Marines in Veracruz in a week.
Oh yeah, we'd overtake that border immediately, and every port would be shut down.
3rd Infantry Division would have already driven through Mexico City at this point. So I just don't understand why we think that we have. Look, if you want to make the argument that, hey, as long as we're giving them money, we get to decide how they use our money. Okay, look, I'd probably buy off on that. But if your argument is that because we paid them money, we get to dictate their policies to them, I'm not going to buy off on that. I mean, if you want to talk about a country that pays another country money, how about China's investment and ownership of U.S. treasuries? I mean, at what point do they get to tell us what to do? I mean, there's a lot of Chinese money invested in the United States. Are we obligated to listen to the Chinese instructions for how we should run our foreign policy? I don't think so.
I think there's some in the Democrat Party that do think so.
Appreciate it. But I think the majority would say, no, that's just not how this is going to work.
No, because we're Americans and fuck off. We'll do what we want.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean we get to tell other countries what they get
Absolutely.
to do either. And I think that's, I think it's gotten, I mean, certainly it was bad in the 80s and 90s, but I think that since 9/11 and the global war on terror, I think we've become very much a bully when it comes to
imperialist.
When it comes to other countries. I mean, if you want to talk, throw out imperialism, I don't think it would be
If you're
I don't think it would be
telling other
entirely
countries what to do.
inappropriate. Yeah. I don't think that would be an entirely inappropriate charge. And the thing I think that is so interesting, as we sort of discussed briefly last week, is that now people, especially on the MAGA side, right, they're just saying, hey, let's make America great. Why are we sending a dime to Ukraine or Israel, for that matter, when literally millions of people per year are pouring across the border?
Yeah.
Why aren't we spending this money on ourselves? Why are we connecting?
And it would take a fraction of the money we're sending overseas.
Yeah. Why are we connecting support for Ukraine with support for building a border wall? Why don't we concentrate here? And as the article we looked at last week, the new isolationism. Is it really isolationism? Or is it just an acknowledgement that the primary interest of our political elite does not appear to be the interests of the American people?
Yeah, they're not aligned. I mean, look, it's like sitting down with a household budget. okay, we're giving this much money in charity and to this place and that much charity to that place. And then we're paying for a brother-in-law and we're also paying for a sister and maybe some parent stuff. But we don't have any money to actually buy food, pay our rent or mortgage, our car payment, buy gas. And we're going to have to borrow all that money. It's like these do not seem like well thought out financial plans. So you've got to reorganize in the very least. And some people are going to get the short end of the stick because you know you're the goose. You're laying the golden egg. Can't lay any more eggs. Everybody's shit out of luck. So why should we drive ourselves into the ground? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, there was a deal I saw this last week that within the next couple of years, the deficit or the national debt is going to be increasing by $1 trillion every 100 days.
No, they're saying it's now. They're saying now that it's increasing by $1 trillion every 100 days. And by the way, what's the yearly debt payment? It's it's a little over $1 trillion a year.
1.2 trillion now for just debt
Right.
service. You know, it wasn't too long ago when we were paying 172 billion a year in debt service, and that just seemed great.
That seemed like an awful lot.
No, actually, it seemed fine. It was because it was after 2008 when interest rates were nothing, right? And in fact,
Yeah, that's true.
at one
Yeah.
point, interest rates were negative. So, you know, the yield on the 10-year was 1.25%. And
Right.
that's great. We can build up debt forever at this level of interest rate, but it's not going
Yeah.
to stay
Who
that
wouldn't
way.
buy it?
Yeah, it's not going to stay that way forever. At some point, and I remember we were talking on the podcast probably about 4 or 5 years ago, maybe a little longer than that because we've been doing this for so long. But I said something about, you know, at some point, treasuries are going to go back up to their historical rate of interest, and we're going to end up paying, you know, it's not going to be 175 billion a year. It's going to be 850 billion a year. Now 850 billion a year looks like a pretty good deal
And it is.
compared to what we're doing now. This is
Yeah.
this
And
is
it's
what
only going to get worse.
yeah, this is what you call a death spiral. I mean,
Yeah.
quite honestly, we are going to ride this puppy down in flames, and here we are. Somehow we got here to the collapse of Western civilization.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for the cheery part of this podcast.
Yeah, but I bring it up because there's a method to my madness. We have our first bipartisan funding bills wending their way through Congress. So today, there are 6 spending bills that are usually part of the omnibus that have been negotiated between Democrats and Republicans. What's in them? Who knows? They were negotiated in secret. We don't know, but we certainly hope to pass the package this week to head off our government shutdown on midnight next Saturday. And so
Right.
we're going to try to keep things open for a while with 459 billion new spending, or 459 billion in spending. There are some agencies, a 7% cut to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, a 6% decrease to the FBI, and a 10% slice to the EPA's budget. Now, before we get too excited about that, and you raise your hands in victory, hoorah! Let us remember how the government calculates cuts.
Right.
They don't calculate with zero baseline budgeting. They calculate via current services baseline. So there is an assumed spending increase every year for every agency that is baked into the cake. And if you increase their spending by less than predicted, in government terms, this is what is known as a cut in the agency's funding. So whenever Johnson...
Still better than what we've had in a long time.
Yeah, so whenever Johnson comes out and says, oh, look, we're cutting this and that, are we? Or are we only increasing the budget of the FBI by 94% of what we originally would have increased their budget.
Right.
So is this a 6% decrease in zero-based terms?
And I'd have a lot more respect if he would just come out and say that. I think people would understand. Look, we already know we're going to be spending money hand over fist for a while until we can get control of the budget and actually have a budget. And nobody wants a government shutdown. Well, I mean, I wouldn't mind it, but uh, people generally don't want a government shutdown. It looks like they're just playing games because they are, and they fear that it's going to impact them personally, which mostly it won't. Um, and you've got to fund certain things. Okay, that's fine. We do pay for the FBI, and we should pay for the FBI, et cetera, et cetera. What
Well, I think you and I would disagree there, but okay.
we 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 should get the respect from our legislators of saying, okay, look, we're not going to increase the budget as much as we would have. That's more honest.
Yeah, it has the virtue of being true. Yes.
Right. But why not just be honest about it? Yeah, we got to increase the budget because blah, blah, blah. Explain it.
Okay. Look,
maybe some people will buy it. Maybe some people won't, but at least we can have the argument.
Nobody is
going to just say that we're cutting when you're not really cutting. Well, we don't get the chance to have that argument.
Yeah. Nobody is going to open the door of truth in the budgeting process, even slightly. Because once the camel's nose comes into the tent, the rest of the camel is, why are we spending 67% of every federal dollar on Social Security, Medicaid, and interest on the
other social programs, right?
Yeah. I mean, because that's the question that once you start asking that, you said a minute ago, we're not going to get control of the border or of the budget, now. So we got to do something now until we can get control of the budget. I got bad news for you. That's never going to happen, because all of the spending for Social Security and Medicare and interest on the national debt, that's non-appropriated spending. That has to happen.
That's right.
By law.
That's right.
At this point, we could literally eliminate the entire United States government. Shut down Congress, shut down the executive branch, and only have Social Security and Medicare, and we still wouldn't make enough tax revenue to cover the cost of those programs and interest on the national debt. We are now borrowing money just to pay interest on the national debt.
That's how these schemes work.
Yes. So you could cut down the 30 or so % of the federal budget that funds the executive branch and by the way, the judicial branch, and also the legislative branch. You could cut it all, and we'd still be in debt. We'd still run a deficit every year. We'd have no military. We'd have no Department of the Interior. We'd have no Congress, no Library of Congress, no court system, no Supreme Courts. And we still wouldn't have enough money just to pay for Social Security, Medicare, and interest on the national debt.
I'm getting giddy thinking about that debt situation.
Yeah, but I mean, if you want to tell the truth about how the budget works, the truth is that the only tool that we have to get control of the budget would be massive cuts to Social Security and Medicare. Good luck with that.
Well, I think our generation has figured that out, and I include you as an honorary member of our generation. We've already figured that out. We know that we are not going to get shit in Social Security, probably not even Medicare. And I know that there are plenty of people in our cohort, those born in the 60s and early 70s to mid 70s, who are saying, look, fine, we'll keep paying the stupid taxes, but let's cut it off. Anybody under such and such an age, you're not getting anything, but you're also not going to pay anything into it. Everybody else, above a certain age, okay, you're going to continue to pay in it, but if you get anything, it's not going to be that much. I, I think a lot of us have resigned ourselves to that reality, and it is reality. That's I am never going to see a dime of Social Security payments. Medicare, I might get something out of it. In fact, I don't really get a choice. Um, I have to, you have to, we all have to um, uh, buy into Medicare. And if you don't, then you have to pay back money. It's such a screwed up system. Um, and on top of that, you still also have to, because remember, Medicare only pays for hospitalization. What you pay every month out of your paycheck only goes towards the very basic part of Medicare, which is hospitalization and emergency care. Everything else, Medicare Part B, Part C, Part D, that comes out of your pocket. You're still paying for insurance.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's almost inevitable that Social Security is going to have to be means tested.
It would make the most sense.
And it would then become a safety net. But politically,
which is what it was supposed to be in the first place.
Yeah, but politically, telling people all of the money that I mean, because look, we are paying.
I think it's going to get an easier sell as people age out.
I mean, we don't realize it right now, but we do pay 15% of our salary every 2 weeks into Medicare. It right. is 7.5%. Well,
people don't realize it because the employer pays part of
7.5%.
Half of it.
But I mean, it's still 7.5% of your salary that you see out of your check. Then there's the other 7.5% that your employer is paying. That's 15%. That comes out of your paycheck every 2 weeks. That's just money that's gone. And by the way, it is the most regressive tax that we have, just so that everybody is aware. Telling people now that, okay, well, you've been paying 15% of your salary all your life, and now we've decided that you don't get any of it back because you make too much money. I just don't know how that's going to fly.
I think it might fly a bit easier once the boomer generation is in charge anymore. Because, like I said, I think our generation, again, you're an honorary member.
Okay, let me be clear. I was born in 1964 to parents who were actually baby boomers who were born after the war. So
yeah,
I cannot be both a baby boomer and the child of a baby boomer. I am in the next generation. So even though 64 is the
63.
64 is the cutover. My parents would still be baby boomers, so I wouldn't be part of their generation.
You'd still be a baby boomer. But you're right. It's and like that makes any difference anyway. Those whatever those stupid arbitrary
lines are.
The people who are coming up, from the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, actually saw, witnessed, went through, the fuel lines of the 70s. What happened with the fuel embargoes, what happened with AIDS, what happened with all these other things, and all the promises and all the benefits, and how it just got all screwed up. So we've seen it all, right? We're not fooled. We're not loud about it, but we're not fooled. And I think people understand that the next generation, our kids and our grandkids, are the ones who are going to suffer if we keep going down the same road. And it's just easier to sacrifice something that you never expected to get in the first place, than to try to keep it going and be selfish about it.
You say that, and look, I'm sure a lot of it is the baby boomers, but it's one thing it's one thing to feel academically that Social Security is not going to help when you retire. It is another thing entirely to be told, oh, we're going to change the law to ensure that doesn't happen. It is an academic hypothetical on the one hand. When it becomes actual reality on the other hand, I think people's reactions might be a bit different.
That's a fair critique, and you're right. But I do think that the next generation to be entering after the baby boomers to be entering into those retirement years are going to be a little more um, able to not only handle a reduction in payment. We don't have a whole lot of expectations. $2,500 a month is not going to make or break me. It's just not going to happen. So, and that's basically, I've been working since I was 16. Um, I, I I really don't think I'm going to get a whole lot more than 2,500 to $3,000 a month. And I've still got another 10 years until I can even begin to reap those benefits. So, well, I guess what, 62 you can start, but um I don't think anything is going to change in the next 10 years that is going to increase that payment to where it's something I actually depend on. Some people will.
Yeah, well, look,
So I understand that.
I have
And
largely
that's why I think means testing makes a lot more sense.
I have largely decided that I probably am not going to be able to retire in the sense that my
Oh, I
parents
have
and
too.
grandparents were able to retire. I just don't
Yes.
believe that I'm going to have this golden years where I can just, play golf and relax on the fruits of my labors. I just don't think it's going to happen. In the time that we have left, because it's already 6:15, so I do want to move on. Just a couple of things that I think we can probably dispatch fairly shortly. Number one, in Selma, Alabama, the Attorney General was there for the Bloody Sunday commemorative service, telling them that his largely black audience that their right to vote is under attack. Of course, under attack by Republicans, obviously. Um, Efforts by states and jurisdictions to implement discriminatory, burdensome, and unnecessary restrictions on access to the ballot, including those related to, and here's an interesting set of things that he objects to: mail in voting, the use of drop boxes, voter ID requirements, and, of course, redistricting plans that dilute the vote of black voters and other voters of color. So, two assumptions show up here, and they're the common assumptions on the left, both of which I despise. Number one, that mail in voting, drop boxes, and voter ID requirements, any restrictions there are prima facie discriminatory rather than attempts to protect the integrity of the election system. And the idea that, well, black voters and other voters of color deserve their own districts. Are we back to segregation now? And it
Well,
really irks me to see this. And framing any sort, and this is now just the common practice for Democrats, any sort of change to the electoral regime which would make it easier to ensure that the people who vote are actually eligible to vote is automatically decried as racist now. I can't imagine why you would do this. Well, first of all, I just don't believe that you want an election system with integrity. Because you believe
well, they've
if you
done.
have an election system with integrity, you'll lose votes.
Yeah, I think you nailed it right there. That's exactly what they're worried about. I mean, let's face it. Why wouldn't you want people to feel secure in their vote? I mean, we're on an honor system here, ostensibly. You are who you say you are. Okay. Well, we need a little more than that. Can you show me something that says you are who you say you are and that you're allowed to vote? Oh no, you can't ask that. As a matter of fact, I can't remember who it was. It's Kansas, Oklahoma, somebody Midwest, and this was during the Obama years. Um, I believe wanted to include on their uh, census count or something. Or no, actually, no, it was on the registration, the voter registration forms, whether or not you're a U.S. citizen. Just asking, check a box, are you a U.S. citizen? And they went all lawfare on that and it got overturned
Why would you
as
want
being,
non-citizens to vote? Why would that be something you're pushing?
yeah, that's a conundrum.
And what's the point? What?
And also, why would you not want to protect the border and let a lot of non-citizens in? Huh.
Huh. Well,
Hmm.
let's not get into the conspiracy theory of the Great Replacement theory, because that would be wrong. Even
And
mentioning,
racist.
and of course, obviously, it, it is so irksome to see that. And I think what's even more irksome is the number of people to whom this is argued who believe it. And if you want to talk about who gets hurt most by, uncontrolled illegal immigration,
Start quoting Cesar Chavez.
yeah, I mean, you want to talk about somebody who didn't like illegal immigration. How about the Hispanic fellow that created the United Farm Workers Union?
Mm-hmm. I mean, they used to beat the hell out of illegal immigrants.
Yeah,
And I'm not condoning that, but it should at least give you an indication of how they felt about people coming in and ruining all this hard work that they had done to get better wages and better conditions. No, Hesse, I'll do it for a lot less, and I don't care about the conditions. Yeah, no, fuck you, pendejo. Back to your country.
yeah, exactly. That was Cesar Chavez's attitude. I who gets hurt the most by having non-English speaking, low-skilled workers come into the United States?
And who gets helped the most?
It's basically minorities, people of color, the low income.
It's a wealth transfer from the lowest denominators to the highest denominator.
Yeah.
Well, denominator's not right, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just amazing to me. It's not amazing to me that the argument is made because it is so cynical. I expect it, and I expect that level of cynicism and dishonesty. It's the acceptance of it that and by the way, there are a lot of black people who are now waking up to
That's true. Yeah.
to what this level of immigration actually means for the black community. It means that they are not going to be able to get jobs.
And interestingly, it's because of social media that a lot more of them are coming to that realization, because there are a lot of black people out there, not even necessarily conservative, but there are a fair number of conservative, YouTube and podcasters and on Twitter and whatever else, who make their case, and they're followed mostly like by black people and by a lot of dissenting black people, and they're changing minds. They're changing a lot of minds, especially when you can point out actual statistic, not just statistics. I mean, you can point out the statistics, but you can point out actual circumstances where you personally got screwed because of these policies, and people can recognize that.
Yeah. So anyway, that was just one thing that came to mind that I wanted to discuss relatively briefly. The other thing is this weird deal that went on in Alabama. The Alabama Supreme Court's ruling on IVF, which is that frozen embryos are people and therefore subject to wrongful death of a minor legislation should something happen to them, which has since prompted multiple in vitro fertilization clinics to shut down operations.
This is an overreaction, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this just seems like a weird. Why would you? I mean, the Republican Party, the pro-life party, I suppose, Um, why would you not want? Why would you want to make a ruling that would, in effect, make it more difficult for people to have children and raise a family?
Well, and that's the thing is, I don't know that it does. Uh, from what I've read, now I have not read the decision itself, so I'm working from a space of uh, non-clarity as well. But from what I've read, it only applies to certain circumstances. It's not an overarching rule that every single IVF embryo that's been fertilized is going to be treated with this, much less treated that way under any of the laws that would prevent murder or whatever else. It's only in certain circumstances that seem to have something to do with, like, somebody dies and who gets the embryos and that kind of stuff, as far as I can tell. Now, I'm not saying this as anything authoritative. It's just from my very incomplete surveying of what was out there, and it seems to me to be an overreaction. Now, if it is exactly what those who I'm saying are overreacting, um, if that's the actual law, then yes, it seems like a serious overstep, and to be counterintuitive to the overall, I guess, conservative, at least right to life, idea of we want more babies. So why would you put a kibosh on a viable means of doing that?
Yeah, well, we're also hearing from a number of Republican legislators who are already forecasting that if they can get a majority in Congress, they're going to try to pass a nationwide ban on abortion.
What a stupid idea. How clear could the Supreme Court
I,
be?
I,
It's not a federal issue.
yeah, I'm right there with you.
Done.
I think it would be hilarious for them to actually take over, try to impose that, and then to have the Supreme Court overturn it and say, nope, we've already talked about this. State issue. No federal interest. Bye.
Assuming that Trump can actually assume office without plunging us into a civil war.
Well,
That's what they're going to
no,
do.
no, no, no. Let's save that for
Sorry,
another week.
I didn't mean to go there.
We're trying to have a more positive conversation this week. Oh, by the way, I meant to mention this on our previous topic. From chat, they're talking about raiding IRA and 401k accounts too. The government.
Are they really? I hadn't heard that.
Yeah. So anyway, I just thank you, chat. I'm trying not to ignore chat. I am trying to look and see what's
Not that that's
see what's
like
going on.
the downplay of Western civilization at all.
Yeah, but it's just it. I think that once the Supreme Court made their decision on overturning Roe versus Wade, that the more I hesitate to use the word radical or extreme, but the more heavily pro-life wing of the Republican Party has decided that that is some sort of permission to pick up the ball and run with it.
I mean, I think it is. I don't necessarily that means it should be successful in all its applications, especially when it comes to how you push the movement forward. Now, as I've always been extremely clear, I'm an outlier. I'm way more extreme on the right to life than most people in this country. Probably 90%, maybe even higher. I'm an outlier. I think all abortion should be banned. That's my personal view. But I'm not dumb enough to look a gift horse in the mouth and know that, hey, we just returned this to the states, and that's where it should have been all along. And there are some states that are going to, put restrictions on it. Maybe not the restrictions I want, but by lowering the number of babies who are killed every year, in my mind, we're helping. And eventually you can start ratcheting that backwards. Going for broke on the first try, I think that's just dumb. It's illogical. It's strategy wise, it's just dumb.
Dumb, yet perfectly in keeping with the competence of the Republican Party.
As well, that's why they're called the dumb party.
Yes. Well, I think with that, Michael, we should probably say goodbye, because we want to be upbeat this week, and so I think we've been as upbeat as we possibly could.
Namaste.
Have a great week, Michael. We'll talk to you next week.
You too. Bye.
You've been listening to the Observations Podcast, or more precisely, watching the Observations Podcast for Sunday, the 3rd of March, 2024. As always, we thank you for watching. We hope that you'll be watching again next time. Until then, have a great week, everybody. So long.